Good morning, Vietnam. Welcome back to my, I believe, 9th podcast. Hope you stay with me on this journey. Today, we are going to talk about bloggers or podcasters, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just to give you an idea how bad podcasts have become on YouTube. I just opened YouTube in front of me, and sucralose is toxic to your DNA. Educational video. Strategies for living longer by Rhonda Patrick. Why I went looking for a wife overseas. Time is up for Donnie. Can't handle the pressure. That's a vlog from Midas Touch, which I'll discuss in a minute. Anyway, you can see the variation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, I like to do my vlogs ad hoc. I don't like to look at my notes or to read from my notes. I see some of the vloggers have teleprompters. There's no way they're not. You see me pausing on my previous videos and trying to think what I need to say next. But I like to just make some small mistakes and ramble on and try and remember everything first off. It looks more natural rather than being a politician and reading off teleprompters. So today is basically about news, media, health and exercise podcasters. The good, especially in the news area, is I think the best is the Young Turks, TYT. Except for one co-host, is Ben Glieb, the Jewish apologist. He and Cenk Uygur had a bit of a shouting match a couple of weeks ago about let's just call it the Palestinian war at the moment, where Israel is murdering about a few hundred people every day. And Ben was trying to claim that Israel is defending itself. Well, I don't know why he cannot do his own research and see that every time there's a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, there's like a death ratio of anywhere between 10 to 1 to 100, and now it's going to be even much higher to 1. Many people will say it's their own fault. Well, you try and live in a prison all your life. The second, I think, best news blog is The Majority Report with Sam Cedar. I don't think it's quite as good as TYT. I think they do less research and the discussions are better on TYT. One recent discussion on The Majority Report was about HIV. They were discussing the Joe Rogan interview he had with Eric Weinstein, I believe. And I found it really disheartening, and that's why they're nowhere near as good, I think, as 2IT, is because they didn't do their own research. HIV is not in the limelight anymore. But for people like me, it has never left. I followed it intensely in the 80s and 90s because I never believed the hype, the media, especially the way the media was talking about it. It's like the Iraq War. The media completely let us down. I'll talk a bit about that later. So the Majority Report guys really knew nothing about the history of the reporting of the AIDS epidemic. And even if you research it now, and I just did some quick research on it again, the articles make statements like, it is a general accepted fact that monkeys started AIDS or HIV, that the virus came from monkeys. I mean, I'm sorry, what a lot of absolute crap. It couldn't just be an immunity deficiency in humans. It was mainly detected in gay people, and I know of 2 personally, gay men who died of so-called AIDS, but they were heavy drug users. And you don't die of AIDS, or AIDS resulting from HIV, you actually die of an accepted disease like everyone else, like pneumonia. Except when you get pneumonia, it can throw your T cells out so much, and guys like Robert Galo and Luc Montagnier, the 2 guys who so-called found the AIDS virus, claimed that it was something really, really different and special. Well, HIV, even though it's the last letter is for virus, if you do your own research and go back and look at if you can find the data anymore, it's not a virus. It doesn't conform to in any way what a current virus definition is. I don't want to get into that any further, but basically I think people, when they discuss something like that, or even the Iraq War, or even the Palestinian War, you got to look at the hype. The Israeli government is just spewing out lie after lie after lie. I mean, there's been no pictures, no proof of the dismemberment of people in the October 7th attack, cutting off breasts, killing babies. One soldier said, "Oh, I saw all these babies hanging on clotheslines." I mean, it's absolutely disgusting what the media does. Okay, going on. My next favourite guy to listen to is Brian Tyler Cohen. He seems to be very intelligent, does his research, has great guests. He even interviewed Joe Biden, the president. After that, the Damage Report, which is an offshoot of the Majority Report. The David Pakman Show, which is okay. I listen to him occasionally. And of course, I don't know if Rebel HQ is an offshoot of Midas Touch, or I think it's an offshoot of Midas Touch, which is mainly a legal podcast. And I listen to it quite a bit to follow the legal issues of the great Donald Trump. Fair and Balance is okay. Secular Talk is okay. But I wish the guy wouldn't smoke when he's doing it. I mean, what kind of message is that sending to people that the person you're looking at is vaping in between talking? The next is cable, TV and cable. The most I watch, of course, is MSNBC. Now, we're talking about everything's on YouTube. That's all I'm talking about. Then CNN to a much lesser degree, but they have a couple of good guys on it. Morning Joe occasionally. And of course, of course, the great Jessica Tarlov on Fox News. I mean, she's the best. How she controls herself is unbelievable compared to those other four morons who just lie through their teeth. John Oliver, his show is great, almost all the time. I've got a bit tired of watching it. And actually, I don't think he's a funny guy when he's not on his show. Where I've seen him interviewed a few times, he's not really funny. And of course, SNL, I don't know, I haven't really watched that for a long time. Excuse me. Of the late night shows, Bill Maher has lost it. He's trying to act like Ronald Reagan, sitting in an armchair in front of a fire smoking cigars. I mean, what a joke. Seth Meyers is okay. Conan O'Brien is probably the best of them. Stephen Colbert is good sometimes. Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, I'm sorry guys, you guys should retire. I saw the interview when Robert Downey Jr. was on the Jimmy Kimmel show. I mean, I'm surprised Robert Downey didn't punch him out. He was so demeaning and arrogant towards him. And I'm sorry, Jimmy Fallon has never been funny. So that's those guys. Other podcasts, not news, who I found quite interesting, is a podcast called Podcast Cringe. I just watched that the other day, and they fact-checked and exposed who Patrick, was it Ben David, what his history is and how he made his money. And it turns out that PBD is a pure grifter. I never liked the guy because he's such a right-wing, so pro-right-wing, it just I can't handle listening to him. And I've seen Cenk Uygur on his show and a couple of other people. And he's such an arrogant son of a bitch. Can't stand the guy. Jordan Peterson, I've watched him many, many times. I call him the original incel, and he's been called that by other people, of course. He's become totally incoherent now. I don't know what's happened to him, but he's gone. I just watched another podcaster called James Smith, The Downfall of Modern Podcasts, which I really, really enjoyed. And another guy I just found out, Ben Carpenter, who also does really interesting, excellent podcasts. Now, all of them I consider okay, you can watch them, except, as I mentioned, Jordan Peterson. I'm sorry, he has gone somewhere. The bad. These 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 guys I mentioned are all right-winger talking point guys. They have all their conspiracy theories. They're mostly misogynists. The guys that are single, they can't, and it seems like they can't find a woman who earns less than them, who is as smart as them. Yeah, good luck with that. Their audience, like Trump, and almost all of them, especially guys like Patrick Pet David, think, gold is coming out of Trump's backside. One of my good friends back in 1995, when I was living in LA, she was also, she was an Australian. I'm a Greek, Australian, American, Vietnamese now. And she told me after she went to Australia and came back, and her nephew also visited her in LA, she said that modern parents, at least the ones she came in contact with, and especially her sisters and brothers, the mothers are totally emasculating the boys. So, where are the parents? I want to know. The parents are the starting points of most cases of misconduct in a family. Recently there was a mother, I don't know what's going on with the father. The mother was convicted of allowing a 16-year-old boy to use a handgun, who he killed someone, or more than one, I forget. But anyway, she got convicted and is now serving time. Let's hope that occurs more often. What are parents thinking? Supposed to be raising children to honour and respect life, not how to use handguns. Anyway, the guys I'm talking about, Ben Shapiro, the guy who talks intellectual verbal diarrhea. That's what my first father-in-law would say. He talks so fast, he uses vocabulary and grammar that I can't follow him half the time. Andrew Tate, can't get much worse than that guy. Tim Poole, David Rubin, Charlie Kirk, and I saw a little bit of Brett Weinstein, who I'll talk about in a minute. And of course, as I mentioned, Patrick Bet-David, the con artist, and his co-host Adam Sosnick, the Jewish apologist. He totally lost his cool when the Egyptian satirist Bassem Youssef was on their show. He couldn't take the answers and the logic that Bassem was telling him about the war and about Palestine and Palestinians. So he just started attacking him personally. That's what people do when you give them logic and facts. The next group of people I'll just quickly talk about are interviewers. Of course, the great Jon Stewart. You can't get much better than John. And Apple finally cancelled his show because of his, I believe, his stance on the Palestinian cause and the war. Anyway, I'll just mention some of his interviews he did with the Arkansas AG, Leslie Rutledge, Christopher Hitchens, the Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, or Deputy Secretary of Defense, Larry Summers, former Secretary of Defense, Senator Nathan Dahm of Oklahoma, and of course the great Bassem Youssef. If you look at the interviews that Piers Morgan does, I mean, there's zero comparison. Piers Morgan is an idiot. I mean, why people watch him is beyond me. Other good shows, I don't think they're great, but they're quite good. The great ones are from Andrew Gold and Alex O'Connor. Diary of a CEO is okay, but I find that he doesn't, when his when his guest makes a statement of some sort, he doesn't react quick enough to do the correct follow-up question, so we can get a more clearer picture and an answer of what the guest is really thinking. I've watched him many times, and it happens all the time. Chris Williamson, he's okay. His expertise is the thing that really bothers me the most. And Lex Fridman, a new guy I've watched a couple of times, he is very unemotional, way too quiet, but quite intelligent and informed. But his style, I don't know if it's natural, but I think he's really trying to emulate William Buckley, that jerk-off Smirnoff. And we'll get to trigonometry. I did a couple of podcasts, short podcasts, being very negative about Konstantin Kisin on one of his podcasts when he talked about something about how the woke left is destroying the world, the country, or something like that. You can watch that if you like. And the other one was about a new girl, young woman, 22, 23, Frida, India. I also did quite a negative reaction to her podcast. She was talking about woke liberal women. So I couldn't take it, so I did a video to respond to that. Trigonometry does do many great shows. They did one on the transgender woman. I should have written down her name. I've forgotten it. It's a great show. They also had the reporter who broke the news on the Tavistock, the puberty blocker clinic that had to shut their doors because they were doing unethical things. Again, where are the parents? Why are parents taking such young kids to get puberty blockers? I think that Konstantin forgets, I've listened to him a few times talking about how the world has gone woke and anti-immigrant, but I think he forgets, for example, why he's an immigrant. I am an immigrant. I went to Australia when I was 5. I went to the US when I was 28. I came to Vietnam at 62. We should be allowed to move freely anyway. Well, I'm lucky enough that I've been able to. But he forgets why people, he forgets why people immigrate in the first place. Well, the obvious ones are things like famine, which is caused a lot by global warming, which is caused by the West anyway, most of it, almost all of it, and China, of course. Wars, which many are created by, or the West refuses to stop them. For example, Syria. They support autocrats and dictators like Saddam. Let me correct myself. They supported Saddam Hussein first. Then they decided that he wasn't their guy. They gave him the chemical weapons, and then they decided it was a mistake. And then because he had a problem with, what's that other country? Not Qatar. I can't think of it. And there was an issue that they were stealing somebody's oil. He was stealing their oil. They were stealing his oil. And George Bush Sr. decided that he would punish Saddam Hussein. So what happened after that? The US has bombed Iraq every day since 1991. Please check it. And in the 90s, and 2000s, even under the great Barack Obama, they bombed the shit out of it. And in the 90s and 2000s, with all the embargoes, before America invaded again, no medicine could go into the country. How many children died? Of course, people want to get out of Iraq, Constantine. We created the problem. And we keep them in power. I mean, have you read The Economic Hitman? What the West does to dictators and people that don't toe their line? And what about Jamal Khashoggi? Saudi Arabia killed him in Turkey, and we did nothing. The West, I'm referring to. Putin just murdered Navalny. And I was just reading yesterday and today, maybe the reason why he had to get rid of him. Who's being held accountable for all this? Why didn't Obama create a no-fly zone over Syria when he had the chance? And he backed out like the coward he always was. And then he let Russia in. And then that was the end of all the fighters against trying to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. That's why people immigrate, Constantine. The Joe Rogan Experience. I really want to I probably will do a podcast on him. He's really one of the most interesting characters that he's a lucky son of a bitch. He had a few MMA fights, and I heard him say that he was getting headaches, or he felt like he was getting brain damage, so he stopped. Then he became an actor. I watched some of his acting. It was okay, but it was very typecast. Then he did some reality shows. And then I guess he started his own podcast and became really popular. So he's with the bad group, I consider. Even though he's done a few good shows. The most recent, I believe, was yesterday when he was trying to control Kid Rock. And also the one he did with Brett Weinstein, actually, the one that the Majority Report criticised because they didn't know what they were talking about AIDS. So I watched some of that, and actually it was reasonable. But just two things about two instances with Joe Rogan. One was he and some MMA fighter, I mean, a little bit brain dead, I thought. They were talking and quoting the President Joe Biden in a speech he gave. And Biden was saying something about the Civil War and the airports. The South would have won if they had airports in the South during the Civil War. And they were saying that Biden should never run because his memory, or he couldn't get his facts together, or he's just losing it mentally. His acumen had been shot. And finally the producer checked the video they were commenting about, and it turns out that Trump said it. But they were saying Biden should not be running for president. And Paul Rogan looked so dumbfounded. So many people commented on it. But Joe, you got to admit your mistakes, babe. If you thought Biden couldn't be president, then why couldn't you say something like Trump couldn't be president? Jesus, you're gutless, dude. God forbid your fan base, all those incel dudes who love MMA and want to beat the shit out of each other. And then the other guy says something about, well, there you go. You need to really fact check information before you do da-da-da-da-da. Well, guess what, dude? Learn a bit of history. Two of the biggest lies of all time. One was Ronald Reagan. Lied through his teeth every day, every time he could. Every time he gave a speech. And the other was Lyndon B. Johnson. That son of a bitch couldn't work out how to get out of the Vietnam War. He had to kill 2 million Vietnamese before he decided he'd had enough. Cowards. All of them. Piers Morgan, I'll just say he just pisses me off as well. And the other Englishman, Douglas Murray, the English apologist. I saw him totally go off because he was given facts and figures and he couldn't take it, so then he attacked the other guest personally. Why, guys, listen to these people. You know, the stiff upper lip guys. Nut jobs. Piers Morgan and this Douglas Murray, you talk about nut jobs. Let's get on to health podcasts. So, there's so many health podcasts, and I just mentioned some at the beginning. They should all look at a report that was done by a podcaster the name is Analyze and Optimize. And I also mentioned them in my last podcast about diet, which I compared my diet with the Blue Zone's diet. And the subtitle is Everyone Used to Be Thin. Here's what they really ate. Everybody should watch that. During the Second World War and the 50s and maybe early 60s, everyone was eating like over 3,000 calories a day, and not such a healthy diet. And they also ate a lot of white sugar. And this is where Nutrition Made Simple, Dr. Where is my guy? I love this guy. I can't find his name, but anyway, that's the podcast name. He did a show on non-sugar sweeteners, and he concluded that they were okay. But just recently, the World Health Organization came out and said that aspartame, they don't recommend taking it anymore because it could cause cancer. But I love the guy. He's probably the best in terms of looking at people and data and giving an honest medical opinion on what the data is showing. I've always said that when they come up with, like they came up with margarine, I don't know, nearly 50 years ago, I always felt, eat the butter, dude. You know it's safe. And then with the non-sugar sweeteners, whatever they're called. take the sugar, dude. It'll only kill you a small degree. Who knows what aspartame will do? And I'll give you some information about aspartame. Aspartame actually was refused to be legal by the FDA 2 times in the 70s and early 80s. Oh, guess who owned the company at that time, or was managing director and chairman of the company? Donald Rumsfeld. That asshole that wouldn't know how to be honest, like he worked under Ronald Reagan as well. They love each other. Lies, lies, and more lies. So, because he'd worked for 2 previous Republican administrations, he made some phone calls when he was director and chairman of I forget the name of the company that owned aspartame. And they finally approved it. Unbelievable. So, aspartame, you can buy it in the form of NutraSweet and Equal. The only one I know that took it daily or at least twice a day was my old friend in LA, an American woman, who I've known for 40 years. And when I saw her about 10 years ago, when I visited, before I left LA, she'd gotten really fat. I mean, a lot of it, and it didn't feel right to me when I saw her. And I think it's because of all the aspartame she took over the previous 30, maybe more years. I have no proof of it. I don't claim that it caused it. But now the WHO is saying, don't use it. Anyway, that's another great health podcaster is one called Man Talks. I watched him a couple of times. He does an excellent analysis of modern man's, especially young men's issues, and gives many great recommendations what they should be doing in their lives and how to become better and healthier in their lives. Much better than the other morons who are advocating become an MMA fighter. Five-Minute Body is okay, but way too focused on the meat diet. But she did have a guy called Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who, that's where I first heard of him, who is an expert, which I'll talk about experts in a few minutes. Another podcaster is Thomas DeLure, but like Dr. Mike, he thinks he's an expert on everything. I mean, you just can't be. I've said in an earlier podcast of mine, I'm an expert in really 3 fields, but nothing to do with medicine or health or exercise. The videos I've made are my personal experience, what I eat, how I exercise, how my body's changed. Another guy is Felix Harder, and I watched his video because he criticized, he's a nutritionist, and he criticized a Joe Rogan episode again, and it was titled, Is Mental Illness a Vitamin Deficiency? I mean, I'm sorry, you talk about stupidity. My brother has a major mental illness for almost 50 years, 48 years. If there was any truth in it, he would have been cured in the last 20, 30, 40, whatever years. the only thing that's changed with modern psychiatry, really, is the medicine has changed. That's my experience, spending a lot of time with my brother, with his psychiatrist, psychologist. I mentioned Analyze and Optimize. Dr. Carvalho, that's his name. The best of the best, I think. I made a mistake. Oh, my apologies. That's not Dr. Carvalho. I've just mentioned Analyze and Optimize with the report on, I don't know why I have them both. I mean, mentioned twice. That was the World War II diet. I've talked about Dr. Mike a little bit. I gave him a very bad rap. I did a whole video on him. He's only a family doctor. And what really ticked me off was his interview discussion with Harry Jowsey when he started talking about early childhood trauma and how he has helped guys cure them of it. Unbelievable. He's now an expert in psychiatry and psychology. Dr. Gundry, I give him a bit of a bad rap. He's a bit nuts. But that's how he gets his audience hooked on him. Actually, quite a few things he says are actually, I think, are true. Like eating too much fruit. But what it really means is you can't juice it. You shouldn't be drinking too much juice every day. And if you look at it in much more detail, what he's talking about in his reports, you will see. He's just a sensationalist, and that's how he makes his money. Ken D. Berry, and I mention him because in my Blue Zone diet comparison, he interviewed a woman, a nutritionist and anthropologist called Mary Ruddock. And I thought the interview was pretty hopeless. She talked about the blue zones. She said she's visited all the blue zones. But then she said, well, I only went up there. I stayed in the city, but I only went up there 1 or 2 days. Well, how can you follow the whole diet? My diet is different every day. But if you look at it over 2 weeks or a month, it repeats itself. So how do you know what they ate? The other thing she says is, she talks about how in the jungles there's no fruit. I mean, I live in Vietnam. It's a jungle country. A lot of it is. And fruit is grown all year round. But she claims that, well, the fruit that does exist is eaten by the animals first, and it never gets to the humans. I mean, come on. It's a little stupid. Another claim. She said a lot of people who research the blue zones don't get the full picture because there's a language barrier. I mean, Jesus. I mean, these are these so-called experts. Oh. Daniel Lieberman seems to be quite reasonable. His advice is, I think, quite good. He doesn't try to project too much about too many different parts of his expertise. Andrew Huberman, another one of those guys who, he's an expert on everything medical, God forbid. Next topic, exercise. I mentioned these people in my exercise video. Living Leggins, she's great. We Shape, he's great. HT Physio, also very good. Proprioceptive Rehab, All of those people are great if you're older and you're starting out in calisthenics. I've watched all these guys and taken tips from them. My calisthenics exercises are much more strenuous, more difficult, as well as I do boxing now, as I mentioned in my exercise blog. For more difficult exercises, again, calisthenics only, Dr. Mike Diamonds, Lee Wyland, Calisthenic Movement, and Chris Heria, even though I'm not a fan of his tattoos. I was going to talk about MMA, but I'm going to leave that. Experts, and I was going to talk also about people in MMA and boxing and other sports who is so-called experts, which I don't know how you can be an expert in so many sports, and some of these guys have never played sports. And the classic guy is, I'm not going to mention it. Anyway, experts on blogs and podcasts. Thomas Sowell, he's an economist and a social philosopher. I'll just read what I've listened to him quite a few times, but I'll just read what his work entails. Sowell is an advocate of classical liberal economics, a student of the problems that arise from the sustained growth of government, a critic of affirmative action, an expert on the history of the complex social patterns of different racial, religious, and ethnic groups, and a student of the attitudes that motivate intellectuals' political beliefs. He's almost spot on everything he talks about. How the growth of government, and especially the civil rights movement under Lyndon Baines Johnson, and how changing of the government and supporting, especially for someone like himself who's African American, supporting African Americans. When we went to Australia in 1956, there was no support for us. My parents. My father worked 2 jobs for the first few years, and my mother worked full-time. She had my baby brother just after we got there, and I believe she was back to work within 6 months, or maybe even less. And we survived. My father survived, my mother survived. The only problem I found with Dr. Sowell's philosophy is that you must have a safety net. We all don't have even the ability, and I think as people are not as intelligent as they used to be and become used to having a safety net, I don't think you can take it away. And you also must have retirement benefits. Without that, for too many people, half, 60, 70% of the Western world, most of them haven't saved enough money. Also, I believe because of some form of social benefits. The house we grew up in was finally paid off after a 30-year mortgage. But I think the monthly payment was, after 30 years, was still $40. The next expert, of course, is Richard Dawkins, the great. They're all great. these guys. As you know, he's an evolutionary biologist, a great speaker, and he never answers a question if he doesn't have the expertise to answer it. He just doesn't give opinions on stuff he doesn't know. I mean, he is a real expert. I've heard him many times. Norm Finkelstein, an Israeli political scientist, historian, a defender of the Palestinians to the core. I don't know if he personally survived the Holocaust. I think maybe he did, or his parents definitely did. And really calm, cool, and collected. He's been on a lot of shows defending the Palestinians. Dr. Thomas Seyfried, I'm not sure, a cancer and biologist expert. He was on the 5-minute, what was it called? The 5-minute Body podcast, and they talked about cancer a lot and diet. And I found him really, really helpful and myself to understand his expertise. He said sugar does not cause cancer. It's a mechanism how your body reacts to sugar within your body that slowly creates the cancer in your body. Gabor Mate, I've mentioned him before in at least one or two of my videos. Another great man. I've listened to him give a lecture about over 20 years ago. I bought his book, In the Realms of Hungry Ghosts. His expertise is addiction, and he opened safe injecting rooms in Vancouver. Had to fight the federal government 3 times in the High Court and to keep them open. And he will tell you that almost all addiction, especially drug addiction, is caused by childhood trauma. Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's getting a bit carried away with himself, but he's an interesting guy to listen to. He likes to hear himself talk. And I think like Michio Kaku. I was reading his latest book at that time, about 15 years ago, and he was saying that the only solution for mankind or progress was to go nuclear. After about, I can't remember, 50 or 100 pages, and then I just stopped reading the book. I'm just not a believer in nuclear energy. Brian Cox, particle physics and astronomy, another brilliant guy. Enjoy listening to him as well. And finally, I'm going to mention Christopher Hitchens, who passed away a few years ago. Love to hear him talk and debate, especially on atheism, religion, politics. He was a great debater and orator. Except his position on Iraq. He was supportive of the invasion, which astounds me. He accepts that the Bush administration lied to get into the war. But one thing, all these apologists, the New York Times, their editor, so many of their op-ed writers supported the invasion at the time. I'm just really disgusted. And I lived through it too, and I knew it was a complete lie. All these tubes that they forced Colin Powell to get in front of the media and say, oh, must be nuclear rods of some sort to develop, nuclear bombs. Destroyed his career. That was the end of him. He was going to run for president. Another two people they destroyed. Valerie Plame, a CIA undercover operative. She was totally outed as payback. Her husband at the time was sent down to Niger, the country of Niger, to confirm that Iraq was buying yellow cake to make nuclear bombs. He came back and said it's a complete lie. But they told him not to say that. So they outed his wife. But the real losses, how many people have died in Iraq in the last 30 years? It's so disgusting. That's why I can't forgive Christopher Hitchens, no matter how great he was. He never mentions that once when he talked about Iraq in the last few years. Really pissed me off. How do you justify any war like the current Israel-Palestinian war in Iraq? What? 1-2 million people have died, more? Displaced? Well, Constantine, they've gone to the UK. Well, we created the problem. Couldn't find a solution. Oh, we can just kill 2 million. Anyway, that's my take on the current situation and the good and the bad and the ugly of the state of YouTube, really. That's where I've only focused on in terms of the vloggers. I was going to talk about MMA and boxing and non-experts in those fields that talk so emotionally. Maybe I'll do a vlog on those people. Anyway, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And see you in the next one.